G'day and welcome to the Pursuit of Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Rosie Burrows, and I'm on a journey to find my freedom so that I can help you do exactly the same. Join me each week as I share the stories of everyday people who have found their own paths to freedom. I'm not going to focus on job titles and accolades because I don't care about that stuff, and neither should you. I want to uncover what truly makes you tick. Who are you when you step away from society's expectations and follow your heart? I still haven't figured it out yet. Have you? Either way, buckle up because it's going to be one hell of a ride. With me today is Rachel Raineri. I met Rachel on LinkedIn, I think late last year, and she's an amazing person and I can't wait to dive into this episode. Rachel, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. It's such a great opportunity to be here and always lovely to share time in your presence, Rosie.
Oh, thank you. I feel the same. Now, one of the first things we spoke about together was this idea of the Superwoman Complex. And I really want to dive into this, and there's so many other things we're going to talk about today, I'm sure. But let's start there. What does the Superwoman Complex mean to you, and how does that show up in your life?
Ooh, yes. Such a strong starting point. I think this idea, this Superwoman Complex, the idea that because I can, I should. And if I'm not, then, I'm not living up to something. And so, just this kind of immense pressure to be able to hold the weight of the world at all times. I had a therapist say that I was trying to put out all the fires all the time. And I realized it often just made me kind of tired and everything a little bit damp. There's not enough water energy, but you get this idea that you can. And once you maintain that for a while, you kind of keep riding it, feeling like any less would be a reduction. How does it show up for you?
Yeah, similar. This thing you said of if you can, then you should. And for me, this whole thing of people pleasing definitely comes into it because I'm so caught up in living up to people's expectations and I don't want to let anybody down, and I have a really strong work ethic and I don't want to be seen as lazy. And my default is always to say yes. Because, people say, take advantage of all the opportunities you get. And I feel so lucky and privileged when people come to me with an opportunity. And I say yes before I even think about, actually, is this something I want to do? Is this something I have capacity to do? So that's something I've really struggled with. I just default to yes so often. And 9 times out of 10, it gets me in a situation where it's not ideal. And I either have to sort of push through and it's not great, or I'll be in the situation where I have to retroactively say no, which I think is even more difficult than saying no up front.
Yes. And yes, I love that you say that saying yes component. And I'm sure you're similar to me where you have a lot of different roles in your life, from your own personal endeavors and interests and the pockets you fit in there, and to all of the relationships you have, the positions, the jobs, etc. And trying to carry all of those all of the time. I think wanting to be the perfect in each one of those is, I think, something I've wrestled with for a good portion of my life. And I love this metaphor I've heard, I can't remember who to attribute it to, but of juggling, and this idea that not all of the balls that you're juggling are glass. You've got to be able to identify which balls are rubber and which are glass, because you are going to drop the ball at times. So you need to be able to drop the rubber balls. And that changes and adjusts. And, that ability to say no in certain roles in certain areas and kind of see the trade-offs and sacrifices we have to make to be an all-encompassing, multifaceted person. As part of the letting go of that Superwoman complex, I think, for me.
And is this Superwoman complex something that has been present in your life since, I don't know, I know for me it's probably since I was a child. Is that the same for you?
Yes, I think I would say so. I've always been a very high energy person, and really diving into things. It it kind of seems to accelerate and slow down at times for me. I
Right.
don't know, does it come in waves for you?
Yeah. Sometimes I'm really good at standing in my power and just grounding myself and being honest with what's important to me and being comfortable with saying no. I think when I've got too many things on my plate, I'm spinning a million plates, I get overwhelmed and I fall back into old habits and I go, yep, I can do that. Yep, yep, yep. And you can't possibly do all the things at once. And so I'm a really strong believer that getting better at saying no is so important because it allows you to say yes to the things that really matter. So part of my journey has been getting clear on what's actually important to me.
Yes, that's a great point. I've read over the past few years. I've done a lot of personal growth, that has been exciting. And I read an article, I can't remember who to attribute it to again, about defining your values and making your choices based on that. And kind of creating a hierarchy of what you value first, whether it's wealth, community, sustainability, relationship, doing some sense of good, and kind of defining how you want to guide your life to be able to guide your decisions. And I realized I couldn't believe I hadn't thought of that and hadn't done that. And I think as I'm kind of launching, I'm transitioning myself into a new professional phase of my life as I'm in grad school right now. And I'm realizing how important it is in this time to take some time to reflect on what kind of mark I'd like to make in the professional world for myself, for the industry, for the planet, and where I find my purpose, so that I can explore it within my career, but not make the mistake of finding my purpose in my career,
That's so important. We're more than just our job title and our work. And,
Oh, yeah.
I love the point you raised about values. That's something I really strongly believe in. I've actually developed a guide to help people identify their core values because, similar to you, it wasn't really something I had thought about. I just bumbled my way through life and,
Yes.
navigating big decisions and change is really hard. And if you're not clear on your priorities, it's even harder. So I've found being able to get clear on my core values has made decision making so much easier and simpler. Like it's a big deal and it's still difficult, but it's easier and it's a simpler process because I can look through the lens of my values and go, well, this isn't aligned with the person I want to be. So, no.
Yes. Yeah, it's like a filter, a very nice filter. Okay, can I ask you, do you feel like you have very clear, defined one, two, three style values, or more of an overarching sense of self?
Such a good question.
And where you guide your values?
Such a good question. Something I've struggled with over the years before I sort of got clearer on values was finding my purpose, and I don't know if you're familiar with Simon Sinek, but he's all about finding your why. And
Yes.
And I sort of got really deep into his content and I felt so much pressure because he said, you've only got one why and it never changes. And I thought, oh my God, I don't know what my why is. And I'm such a multi-passionate person, like it could change. And I felt really restricted. But then I was listening to one of Brené Brown's podcast episodes and she was talking about this thing about values and just reframing it in that way I found so helpful. And I'm definitely not a black and white person, so I don't think I have a 1, 2, 3. But the best way I can describe my values is, I think, really important to me, and I have it on a tattoo on my arm, is to stay true. Stay true to who you are. And it's easy to go off path because you just get caught up in the day-to-day. So that's kind of what I lead with, and I really believe in playing fair in life. You know, it can be tempting to take advantage of people if there's feelings of animosity or anger, you know, and be really reactive. That's not the kind of person I want to be. So I want to play fair and lead with empathy. We've all got shit going on, and I really try not to jump to conclusions. I do it all the time. I muck up, but, you know, I try to really catch myself and pull myself up on that, because I don't want to be that person. And what I've come to realize recently is that creativity is really important to me. And that's one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast. Yes. I just want to be creative. I want to find joy in that. And I might not be good at it, but I'm having fun. I just want to enjoy life. And another thing for me is courage. You know, having the courage to try new things, because this world's scary and it feels safe to stay in our comfort zone. But I like to just remind myself, you know, be brave, try it. You don't know if you don't try it. So that's my best kind of explanation at the moment for what I'd say my values are. But, you know, ask me that in a few months and maybe it's changed a bit. I really think it's natural for it to shift, because we experience personal growth and we change as people. Often it's similar, but I think it's natural for it to change. But what would you say your values are in life?
Okay. Love that. I just wanted to say, I like the way you've been putting this. I want to do this, and I am this kind of person. I've been really intrigued lately. I haven't read the book myself, but I listen as well to Brené Brown's podcast. Love her. And she had James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits, on. And that podcast episode was very monumental for me and just my thought pattern. And he talks about, you know, our choices, our votes toward the kind of person we want to be. So rather than making some goal, which will then lead into the next goal, the next goal, the next goal, right? It's kind of this like destination-oriented mindset, these goals, wherein life is literally journey. It's all about the going. You never get there, but it's important that you go. And so this like going towards the kind of person you want to become makes each choice and each decision just part of that journey, that overarching journey. And so I like that you've put it that way. And I find myself for the past few months writing in that style and reflecting in that style. You know, even reflecting, I like Stoicism, the philosophy of Stoicism quite a bit. And they make mention of healthy reflection and being willing to say, I didn't like the way I handled that so much, and here's why. And that's enough at this moment, because that's all that's in my control at this point. And now I carry forward and I try it better the next time. You know, so in moments of that, I found myself saying, okay, what kind of person do I want to be, if not quite that, right? And how does that align with my inner nature as it is and my strengths, and how can I set myself up to, you know, take best advantage of that? And I think for me, that's probably leans into one of my values, is in embracing, you know, kind of this full spectrum of existence, this duality in which we all exist, where, you know, good and bad are really just two sides of the same coin, or two ends of the same spectrum. I'm very intrigued by the kind of Alan Watts frame of mind as far as that goes. And so embracing kind of this dual-sided or multifaceted being that we are. And Esther Perel, puts it really well also on Brené Brown's podcast, where she says, we often split the ambivalence and try to embody and encompass just all one side of something, but no one is all one side of everything, of anything. And I think for me, I've always been a very intense person. And so coming to this place of just embracing both extremes and settling somewhere within it, rather than trying to bolster or, you know, suspend one side of something and find myself ping-ponging back and forth. I think kind of that radical acceptance, that understanding of what we do and don't control, kind of that stoic belief is a value of mine. I think as we talked about strengths, that acceptance and embracing of my inner nature and learning to work with my strengths is a value of mine, and doing all of this in a way that is making life better for myself and all of those around me as much as I can, to the extent that my strengths contribute to that, right? I think this understanding that existence is also a duality, in the sense that we are our context as much as our context is us. We're all existing within this same earth system, and so our relationship with other life, be it humanity or the planet, the earth on which we live, nature, taking active part and fulfilling our role within that. So again, that kind of ties back into that acceptance and that ability to tie it together in the right direction, if that all makes sense.
I like this idea of, your values as your North Star or your compass, and we're not always going to get it right. But if we can come back and go, I've gone a bit off path, let's redirect. Like, this is where I want to be. None of us are perfect. And I love, you're talking about making life better for yourself, for others, for the planet. And I really believe we're all connected, and it's bigger than just yourself, right? And I love that. Another thing that's important to me, I guess you could call it a value, is connection and connecting with others. I'm a person who has a fairly small, I guess, friendship circle because I want deep, meaningful relationships. I'm not someone who loves to go out and socialize and have chit chat with lots of people because I don't see the point. Some people love that and enjoy it, and I'm curious on how you find that, but for me, I find it very draining, and and I'm an introvert, right? So
yeah.
Speaking with people in general, even if it's an enjoyable conversation, is draining, and I need time to recuperate. So I need to use that energy wisely. How do you find that?
Well, I love your perspective, and I like that we do have a different one, and for very good reason. I think that I love the meaningful connection and the depth of connection, but I also love this kind of idea of common humanity, that we are each a piece of this common humanity. And so the more people, the more cultures, the more ways of life we know, the more we know about humanity as a whole, of which we are a part. So to some extent, the more you know about your own self, maybe just the limits of your capability and longing as part of this grand humanity, if that makes sense. But I am quite extroverted, who does need time to recover, and I have been learning that more and more over the years, and accepting the need to plan that. Otherwise, I won't give it to myself. I do thrive on interaction with people, but it does drain me as well. I'm a big woo person, a winning others over person. So I thrive on it, but I think it is a bit of a game for me to some extent, so it kind of can shift from I'm gaining from this to I'm trying to win this in some way. And that's when I need to pause and come back to myself and reduce my need for validation. So that's an area I'm kind of diving into a lot.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it ties into setting boundaries for yourself, and you spoke about needing to be intentional and actually plan time for you to recover. And to me, that's the perfect example of setting a boundary.
Yes.
So what are your thoughts on setting boundaries? And is it something you find easy? How do you do it? How have you found that? For me, it has been such a journey. So tell me about what it's been like for you.
Oh, same. I'm hoping maybe you have all the answers for me here.
I was hoping the same about you.
It's been a journey. It feels like something I had never considered up until a few years ago in my life. Like, it wasn't a thought. I'm not sure how I had never come across the idea. I think in some ways growing up without boundaries has been a very like free, loose way to explore a lot of parts of myself and other people and opportunities. So I'm kind of grateful for that style, for all that it has served me in. But I'm coming to a point in life where I'm realizing that everything comes at a cost, and the sacrifice of not having boundaries is sometimes feeling out of bounds and not knowing it and not knowing how to address it. And it kind of, that sense of freedom is saying just going with everything. And I've been at a place where I described myself as feeling gaseous, in that I was occupying whatever container I was in. I didn't really have much of a sense of cohesion between being my particles of my being, right? And I kept thinking, who is making these choices? And I think that's a consequence of not having boundaries, is you don't have as strong a sense of self. And so it's a lot harder to gain clarity on who you are, to accept and refine.
I'm just soaking all that in. Yeah,
that's been kind of the beginning of my journey into boundaries. I guess, what about you?
Oh, yeah. You touched on it being related to your sense of self. And I love how you're talking about you're just filling all the space, and who's informing those decisions. I think I've definitely been there, and it's I go there a lot. I find, I'm a bit of a social chameleon. I want to I don't want to make others feel uncomfortable, so I tend to just sort of be quite agreeable, and
I relate.
Like, I don't want to be that person. I'm such an advocate for standing up for what you believe in and expressing your true self. I just said earlier, staying true is a huge thing for me, but it's something I struggle with. Like, it's scary, and there's a lot of fear of judgment for me around expressing my true self.
Whose judgment is it that you're afraid of?
Everybody, even people I don't know. Like, what is that about? It's illogical, but I'm so concerned about what other people will think of me. But to what purpose, right? That doesn't serve me, and I don't think it helps me make better decisions, because I'm making a decision based on someone else's priorities and expectations.
Okay, and have you ever had to kind of come face to face with that fear? Have you received a bad review per se?
No. No, I don't. Not that comes to mind. I think, if I'm being honest, and I'm just sort of voicing my thoughts aloud, so hopefully I can articulate them clearly, is I very much value external validation. And it feels good when someone says they're proud of you, or, wow, that's amazing. I couldn't do that. Like, it feels so good.
Yes.
But again, that's doing things for someone else. It doesn't really serve you. But I fall into that trap, and it's something it's a lesson I'm constantly learning, unlearning, relearning, going round and round. And I think that speaks to my sort of people-pleasing nature, right? I don't want to let people down, and I have such a strong work ethic, and naturally want to serve others and help others, but that very often can come at the cost of myself.
Can I throw kind of my spoon in another thought on that? Have you heard of the idea of love languages?
Yeah.
And, there's the words of affirmation, physical touch, gifts, acts of service, and something else nice. And, for me, I know words of affirmation is big for me, and that means a lot to me. And it sounds like you're expressing something very similar. And so I think, that's kind of a healthy lower bound to the need for validation. It's like, yes, it does feel good, and it is allowed to feel good, right? But where's that upper bound when you're starting to exceed that limit and it's converting itself into something else? Yeah.
That's really interesting. And I feel like you're talking about love languages. I feel like I got a bit of denial going on here because I've done this exercise before. And one of the top one for me is acts of service. And I've always said, oh, words of affirmation. I don't care. You can say anything, but unless you're going to follow through, I don't care. But I've just said to you a couple of minutes ago how much value I place on that external validation. So that's really given me food for thought. We don't always behave in the way perhaps we think we should or that we want to. But sometimes you can't change who you are, right? And you have to learn to accept, actually, that is part of who I am. And I do really, it's important to have those words of affirmation. So, thank you for bringing that to light. That's a really interesting reflection point for me. I'm still processing that. So I'm just
I look forward to revisiting this with you at some point then.
For sure. Yeah.
It's funny, I wonder why it is that you don't want to. Okay, in a very different vein but similar, I denied myself of glasses when I needed them for years because I did not want them. So I just, I was really against it. And I have no idea why. I like them, they're cute, and they really help me take in the world. Yeah. Why do you think it is that you're, kind of adamant against not having words of affirmation as a love language? I'm curious. Any thoughts on it?
That's really interesting. And I think part of it is I've always seen myself as a very independent, strong person. I can do it by myself. So the words of affirmation almost goes against that.
Yes,
I feel like it's in conflict. And I'm making this big assumption that you can't be a strong, independent person and want words of affirmation. And I think I need to challenge that big assumption, right?
Yes,
definitely. Yeah. This ties into, again, a Brené Brown podcast. And I've forgotten the name of the authors. But anyway, I'll write it in the description when I find it. But there's this thing called immunity to change. And it talks about how we often get in our own way when we're trying to make changes. And it kind of reminded me of this because it gets you to look at your big assumptions. So it doesn't matter how much you want to achieve something, there's always a competing, what they call commitment. So my goal, I guess, is to be a strong, independent person, a high achiever. But the competing commitment, perhaps, is, I don't want to fail and I like to be able to do things on my own. I don't want to ask for help. And so my big assumption is you can't be strong, independent and ask for help. And, so they're fighting each other. So I think that's a really interesting dynamic to think about.
And it ties into a bit, I think, this thought I've been having over the past couple of years, especially as I've dived back into grad school. I took some years off and went back to school. And it was a big change and adjustment. I also took some years off and lived abroad and then moved back. So shook everything up very radically. And so it's been a great opportunity to really look at myself and my values and have the chance to put in some hard work in a setting that is a bit of an incubator for growth. So kind of beautifully surrounded by support. And so I've been thinking a lot about imposter syndrome. I think we all face that, and to some extent, a lot of us do. I'll be careful. And I think for me, it really showed up because I had been away from my entire industry and setting for some time, and then launched back into it. And anyway, I kept kind of thinking, what is this? And I've always been afraid of professionalism too, as a person. I've always shied away from it. That's that kind of intensity and lack of boundaries thing, just easier not to have to navigate that. So kind of coming in and thinking about my career and moving myself in a new direction, I've realized I'm very ambitious and driven and daring when it comes to my own very personal endeavors. But once it becomes some sort of role, I get hesitant, and I struggle to do. I fail to do rather than do and fail, and in those scenarios more often. And I think it's because I kind of put this role as like an upper bound for myself. There's a certain way that I have to be, and that's the ceiling. But I really think that those roles are more of a lower bound. There are certain things you must achieve. It's a launching point. You have to fulfill the responsibilities, right? But then you have room to be yourself within it, And so kind of this idea of, oh, independent person, that means this, and so I have to encompass that. But no, that's the lower bound. Okay, you're starting from there, but what do you add to it up into a certain boundary where it's healthy and safe and contributing to that sense of self, right?
Yeah, I love that way of framing it. And it like, I love just challenging the way we think, right? I think it's such an important part of personal growth. And you've mentioned a few times the upper bound and the lower bound. And I think that it also ties in with strengths and weaknesses. And I know that your PhD is in fiber and polymer science.
Yeah.
And can you talk us through, I recall maybe a month ago or something, you had a post on LinkedIn, or maybe it was longer, about navigating your PhD and using your strengths. So can you share a bit about that?
Yeah. I think so. I am a person who has a very floaty and flowery side, which I love about myself. But I also do have a very logical, technical mind that I love to employ. I love fast math, for example.
Right.
I get to throw a lot of times tables or keeping score in bowling, little tidbits. And so I chose a career in the field of STEM. And I enjoy it. But when I did the Clifton Strengths assessment last year, I at first kind of felt invalidated and disappointed that my top 5 strengths were all people related and oriented.
Right. Yeah.
And it was interesting because it wasn't until we did a workshop on it with a cohort from my program, and a boy that I know who's very friendly and kind and smart, and also in my program, also got very people-oriented ones, and I didn't think twice about his position in engineering.
Interesting.
I had to challenge my own bias against myself, and expectations I was placing on myself as a gendered stereotype, that I had bought into, and I thought that was a kind of nice point of challenge for myself, and ability to recognize these are just the things that come most natural to me and make me who I am. And the fact that they're quite different from the field I'm in gives me a very well-rounded perspective and different opportunities. And I've seen that come to play. I'm very good at connecting with people, and it's because I love it. I deeply enjoy getting to know people. And that comes across, and so I've forged beautiful connections within my program in my university where I did my undergrad as well, and it's led me to more and more opportunities, and I've developed a lot of great relationships within people in my program and other professors and across different departments, and that gives me a lot of joy. And it's also a strength of mine when it comes to guiding my path and opening new doors for me. So I realize for myself that appealing to my strengths really helps kind of harvest my energy. I think when we do the things that are most natural for us, then we kind of generate energy through that, which we can then apply to the things that aren't as natural and easy. But when we try to drive all of our energy brute force into that which does not come natural, we run our engine dry and we're not producing more. So for me, it's a good balance of, taking the time to dive into the STEM and relearn chemistry and read a lot of articles and watch a lot of great videos. Thank God for technology today. Shout out to Khan Academy. But aside from that, I really tried to make a point to create opportunities to engage with my lab mates, to do things outside of the classroom, and to build relationships, to get lunch with my friends in and out of school, and to feed that side of myself through connection, because then the rest comes a little bit easier. And that's kind of the point I had made in that post you're referring to.
And it's so powerful. I did the Clifton Strengths as well, and I was also a bit confronted. It's funny. I'm going to talk about the ones at the bottom of the list. So I consider myself an excellent communicator, and that was third from the bottom for me. And I was offended. I was like, excuse me. And positivity was even lower. And I also think I'm quite a positive person. I thought, oh. And then woo was the very bottom of the list. And I was even more offended. How dare you? But I love the way you explained it, that our strengths are what comes easiest to us. I love that. I think that's a very powerful way at looking at it. It doesn't mean that I'm not good at communication, but perhaps it takes more intentional thought. And when I look at it through that lens, I think, yeah, actually that's probably right. And the woo thing, that's just not me at all. That's so difficult. I just need to confront that, right? But my top strength was, I've got it next to me. My top 5, what were they? Restorative, relator, learner, consistency, and futuristic.
And the fact that you're launching this podcast, this whole new business, really speak to all of those strengths from my perspective.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear your perspective on it as an outsider. And what I love about this strengths is it's framed as strengths. Like the bottom of the list, they are not called weaknesses. That it's potential for growth. They're areas of potential. And I think seeing it that way really helps. It's just this really powerful reframe for me that I love. And I think it also ties into something you and I have spoken about a lot, in that our strengths can also be our weaknesses.
Yes.
And it's this continuum. If we take a strength too far, too extreme, I think it can very quickly become a weakness. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yes. Oh, yeah, I absolutely agree. There's 2 kind of literature references that I think of. A beautiful book, The Dance of Intimacy by Harriet Lerner. And she talks very much about this exact topic, and shares that she was in a ladies group and they had a few too many glasses of wine, and someone had the great idea of saying what they each liked and disliked about everyone else. That always goes so well. And she said, she went around, it was difficult to endure, but it was also elucidating to the fact that what we like is the same as what we dislike about people, just in the wrong context or setting or dose, right? You like that I'm a go-getter and that I take charge and that I make things happen, but you dislike when it seems bossy and like I'm taking over the conversation. And they both come from the exact same place, but they are expressed differently and in a different context, right? And then I think about this book I love, The Tao of Pooh by Benjamin Hoff. And it explores the Taoism behind the old Winnie the Pooh stories by A.A. Milne. Very, very wonderful read. And he tells a story, I think it's more of a proverb, about a thief, a pickpocket, which is generally considered a negative trait, a bad thing, is in the army. And they are at war with a neighboring kind of group or tribe of men, clan of men. And so they send the pickpocket to the chief of the neighboring clan to steal something from under his pillow. And so then the next night they send him and he steals something else. And so they essentially send the signal that we can get in here and we can infiltrate and we can make things bad for you, right? And so the neighboring, clan that they're at war with leaves. Right. And so that idea of taking someone who had this supposed weakness, but using it in the right context and setting where it becomes a strength, where they avoided an actual confrontation by employing. So every part of you is part of you, and it has opportunities to shine as strengths and weaknesses. And it will do both, and that's how we'll keep learning to kind of narrow in and confine.
Yeah, I love that. What a powerful story or proverb, as you said. And I'm curious, what do you consider to be your strengths?
That's a good one. And I like that exercise too. This was when I was living in Spain for some time, which is what I did with my time off between undergrad and grad school. I did a lot of, that's when I felt gaseous. That's when I felt kind of at the extent of my freedom. And I started really quality therapy. It was a great time to dive into myself. And one of the first exercises my therapist there had me do was a list of my strengths. And I just think it's a really nice exercise to revisit from time to time, too. So thank you for the question and the opportunity. I think a large strength of mine is connecting in multiple ways. I really like to find the connection amongst all things. This is why I like to be in the STEM field, but do, a lot of reading and writing and exploring of nature and connecting with myself and meditation. I also really like connecting with other people and connecting gaps between things. I think I'm very good at showing up for myself and for others. I love supporting people, and I'm very great, I think, at finding the ways to do that. And I think positivity is just a huge strength of mine. It's one of those things I just can't seem to help. Yeah. I'm grateful to have kind of been born this way, but I really see life as an opportunity in each part of it. And I hold on to that quite a bit. I think those are probably the top couple that come to my mind.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to touch on this, the point that you said one of your strengths is positivity. And I want to know, how has that served you in life?
It's great. I mean, in short, I feel grateful to consider myself a happy person. I think a good amount of it is choice. I do believe in cognizant happiness. I might change that to contentedness, perhaps. Just this kind of sense of being comfortable where you are. I think a lot of times people have asked me, why are you so happy? And I just, I say, I mean, I choose to be. I don't know why I wouldn't be. And it's nice. I make a game out of a lot of things in life. I really take in the strange sort of luck that I have and feel pretty connected with a lot of things that I do because I'm choosing them, I think.
And that's so beautiful.
That being said, thank you. It has its low point, as all strengths and weaknesses,
right.
Where I think I have struggled probably with toxic positivity, and the need to be happy and the inability to accept the hard days and the hard moments and every emotion for what it brings. So that's one of the kind of basements to that one.
Yeah, and thank you for raising that, because it's not all a strength, and we all have our internal battles, right? And I think toxic positivity is, I wouldn't mind talking about that actually, because I think it shows up a lot online. It's all over social media. Where is that line between being positive and being toxically positive? Where is that line?
Yeah, that is a great question. I don't know that I have a line so much as I think I'm trying to embrace things more as a wave or a cloud. This idea that, a wave and a cloud is constantly changing shape and form, but it is always a wave or a cloud and part of the grander ocean or atmosphere. And so I think just allowing feelings to come and to work themselves as they do. So rather than create that line of I must be positive
Right.
at this exact moment. Allow your feelings. I think there's something to be said about giving yourself a space, a specific space to feel and not carrying things out into a sense of self-pity.
Right.
But I think often when we just let ourselves feel what it is, whether it's anxiety or sadness or fear or pain, and just welcome it, it generally does keep transforming itself as a wave or a cloud. And then I'm learning you don't have to worry so much about what is toxic positivity and what isn't if you just feel it as it comes.
I love that.
And allow it to, easier said than done, of course.
Yeah, allowing ourselves to feel is so important. But it's difficult because it can be so bloody inconvenient, you know? Sometimes I don't want to feel. I just want to get on with my day, but trying to block out those feelings or compartmentalize them, self-destructive really. So yeah, I like your framing of this. You know, it's not really about defining toxic positivity. It's about just feeling and navigating that. And I think a big part of it is not judging those feelings, just like, okay, this is how I'm feeling, and okay, I acknowledge that.
Yeah. Welcoming the discomfort of it and not knowing. I think part of that too is welcoming the uncertainty and the not knowing. Not having to define it as good or bad or, you know, toxic positive or not positive enough or whatever it is. I faced this recently. I had a great opportunity of this with my husband, and we had a little clash that just wasn't quite comfortable. And I was like, I want that to be cleared up and okay. It feels kind of uncomfortable. And he said, maybe that's okay for right now, which was a really powerful thing to say. And then very shortly after, it was a minor dispute. So it was nice to kind of work through in this way. Shortly after, we came up with another kind of compromise and possible solution that would work for both of us, and realized that discomfort was a good indication that the previous system wasn't working. Right. And that's all that the discomfort was. And wanting it not to be there was trying to slap some solution onto it and not actually allow ourselves to understand it. And then it was very easy to try to work through with that space and time to understand it. So that's, you know, kind of what that allowing that discomfort is for.
Yeah, you raise a really good point. I think learning to embrace discomfort and uncertainty so important, and it's something I struggle with, you know, because it's scary. It is scary. It's so unknown and it's uncomfortable, and it just like, why can't it just be easy?
It's, for me, it's kind of like this feeling of, if I know, then I can cross not knowing off my to-do list and take that weight off my shoulders. Right, it's like I'm carrying the uncertainty as something to solve at all times.
But we don't have to solve it. You know, it's a journey. It's self-growth, self-discovery. Like, I think it can be beautiful. So yeah, trying to reframe that is something I definitely am working on, and try not to judge myself on, right? It's just
yes. Yeah, I'm there with you. I really am.
I want to come back to what we were talking about at the beginning. I think it ties in with this Superwoman complex. And, you know, when we feel like we're doing well in something, we kind of crave more on it, and we just pile more and more and more onto our plate. And it becomes, or at least for me, and I'd love to hear your perspective, it's like, well, why am I doing it anymore, actually? Like, you're just piling all these things on, but to what end?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I've been there. I can remember a few moments that I've said to myself, what is the point of this? Why am I doing any of this? Sometimes I kind of like those moments, though, because they are a reminder of our complete freedom.
Right.
We can do anything at any time. There are no actual rules and limitations. There are consequences.
Yes.
To our choices. But I like the existential philosopher Sartre says that liberty is that freedom is anguish, that a lot of us get very overwhelmed by this, sense that we could do anything. There's nothing really stopping us. But sometimes I think when I hit that point of, why am I doing all of this? It's kind of a reminder of that. Oh, wait, there is no actual need or requirement or anything tying me to all this, and it's almost like hitting that boundary and busting it open a little bit, which just, I don't know, maybe like releases all the air and frees you to reassess the boundary,
So true, yeah. And I love that you actually tied it to freedom. You said there's no rules. I agree.
Yeah.
It can feel like there are so many rules, and the status quo just builds this very well-defined box, and this is how we do things around here. Don't step out of it. There's not actually a wall there, but we're told there is.
So that might even kind of tie into this idea of like strengths and weaknesses being two sides of the same coin, where that kind of desire to pile so much on is at some point becomes a weakness, but then it can almost transform into a strength again, where you realize, well, I can do all that.
Yeah.
Do I necessarily want to or need to?
Right.
No, but what else can I do that I didn't know I could do? What other boundaries can I push, and to what extent and for what reason? And is it maybe somewhere more aligned with what I want to be doing?
Love that reframe. And I truly believe all of us are so much more capable than we realize.
Yes.
And it's only when we're backed into a corner and, life throws us a bit of a curveball and we just have to do it. And somehow we get through it because we're amazingly strong. But yeah, we shouldn't forget that. And I like that you're framing it as it is a choice. We put all these things on our plates and we're doing all the things, but that doesn't have to be a weakness, right? I love that you're framing it as good things can come from that. But if we go back to the point you raised about it being freedom, I think this brings us to a really nice kind of ending point, because as you know, the podcast is called Find Your Freedom. And a question I like to end on and sort of get people to think about is, what does freedom mean to you and how does it show up in your life?
I think that's a great question. And I can tie this into a LinkedIn post I saw you make recently. And I have over the years come to understand freedom as the ability to say no, as well as yes, and to make your choices, which I think the bottom line is your freedom is always in your choice. There's this notion that people can take anything else away from you, but they can't take away your decision. And that is different in different contexts. I think I'm fortunate to live in a place in the world where that's a very wide open box. When other people have these circumstances that's much more limited. Yet in the end, that is all we have, is the freedom of our choice, and how we respond to the situation given the options that are available.
Right.
And I think kind of coming to that has been a sense of freedom, learning to accept what is the reality and what the options truly are, and make the intentional choice on which one I want to follow. Also remembering that life is a continuum and we can come back to make another choice, and it's a continuous choice after choice. That's about constantly making the next choice or the choice we're on.
Yeah, I love how you've said, there's always a choice, and it's powerful that you acknowledge that's different for everybody, right? In terms of how big that box of choice is. But I think there's always some sort of choice, and I think it's a bit of a game changer to realize that there is a choice. Sometimes the choices might not be exactly the choices you want, but there is a choice, and I think framing it that way gives you a sense of agency, right, in your life.
Yes.
Which is so important for everybody. I think when you start to feel like all the decisions are being made from you and you're just being taken out to sea, it's so disempowering and overwhelming. So yeah, recognizing your choices and making a purposeful decision, I think, is so important. And I love that you see that as part of your freedom.
Yeah. What about you? Have you been answering this every time, or would you share with me?
No, yeah. I find it so hard to articulate. How do you possibly articulate freedom? I think a big part of it for me is freedom of my time. You know, I have lost both of my parents. So I lost my dad at 21 and my mum at 27. So it's both of those life events, you know, they're traumatic, but they've really brought into perspective that time is one of those things we can't control, right? We don't know how long we have on this earth, and that can be scary. But my choice is, how am I going to spend that time? I don't know how long there is, but I can choose how I spend that time. So to me, part of freedom is being intentional with that, and I want to live a life where I am being intentional with that. So that's a huge part of it for me, the time factor. And also, I think it really ties in with my values, right? Because what freedom means to each of us is very much dependent on what's important to us and who we are. So a big part of it for me is just finding the joy in things and being creative. Having the space in my life to do that. I don't want to fill life with all the things that are just sucking the life out of me. I want to do the things that I enjoy, and there might not be any end point to these creative things I'm doing, but it's the journey that I enjoy. And the ability to say no to things is very much part of what I consider to be freedom, because and it does involve being able to say yes, but I think for me, I frame it as being able to say no, because that's something I find so difficult. And when I say no, I really feel it allows me to say yes to something that's more important, which ties into being purposeful with my time. And saying no, how that shows up in my life is when I put myself first, when I put my priorities first. And when I put myself first, the outcomes are always wonderful. They might be unexpected, but it's always so rewarding. That's my definition of freedom at the moment.
Yes. No, I love it. And I thought of when you said that it's hard to articulate. It reminded me, I really like old soul from the United States, and I got into watching some documentaries for a time, and I watched one on Nina Simone, who was a very powerful part of the civil rights movement as well. And so she has a beautiful song, I Wish I Knew How It Felt to Be Free. And in the documentary, they asked her what it felt like being on stage, and she said she loved it because that's when she felt free. And they said, what does that mean? And she said, I don't have words for it. You know it when you feel it. And then she followed it up with no fear. And that was kind of her identifying, that's that feeling. And I loved that. That just always really stuck with me.
Yeah.
I thought I'd share that as we close. Yeah.
So powerful. Thank you. I just want to say thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation with so many twists and turns, and you've really challenged my thinking on some things and given me a lot to reflect on. So thank you. This has been really enjoyable, and I always enjoy our chats. But before we sign out, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, thank you so very much for having me. This has been such a joy. It's really nice to take the opportunity to get to know other perspectives and other expressions of humanity. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
I feel the same. Thank you so much, and we'll talk soon.
Have a good one.
Yeah, you too. If this episode resonated with you at all, could I please ask that you share it with a friend who you think could get value from it? And whilst you're doing that, make sure you follow and subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss another episode. And whilst you're following or subscribing, please leave us a rating, preferably 5 stars, and also a written review. Doing each of these things is going to help this podcast reach more people and impact more lives, which is, at the end of the day, is what we're here to do. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Remember, you matter, you're worth it, and you are so, so capable. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you next week.